Welcome to the Design YouTube channel. I'm Hugh, and today's video is part of a webinar series. Get ready for an engaging session ahead that will probably give you a lot of new information. Thank you, and hope you'll enjoy the video. Hello guys, welcome to another video. In this video, we're going to go through the topic of horror. So bear with me and let's see what we have in store for us. So we're going to talk about horror in games and films, to be more specific, and how this actually works. And hopefully it's going to be informative. And since we're, in the month where we have October and Halloween, of course, I believe it's a great topic to actually explore. Here we actually go through the table of contents. We have intro to horror, horror themes in pop culture, horror themes in video games and films. We have horror elements across pop culture and usage, and the importance of storytelling and fear, and last thoughts on horror topic itself. Let's go into intro about horror and what it means. First of all, we have to understand that this is a broad topic. Of course, we are not touching absolutely everything related relationship with horror, but we are going in through certain areas that are very clear. And we're going to talk a bit about the Victorian era, which we have a lot of ghost stories from. We got a mythos of various types of stories, and of course folklore that is across different cultures and different countries. So the horror genre in games and films is designed to evoke fear, tension, and unease by exploring dark, unsettling themes and confronting primal human fears. So we have to understand there's a component of primal human fears there that we have to understand that is intrinsic to almost everybody that is out there. Through a combination of atmospheric design, disturbing visuals, and psychological tension, horror uses elements like monsters, the supernatural, and existential dread to immerse audiences in suspenseful, often terrifying experiences. So we'll actually notice this through the exploration of this theme, that this kind of ranges from like subtle psychological fear to usually intense visceral scares, or like jump scares, as most people know them. All of it aiming to elicit emotional and physical reactions while these stories are being told. This actual idea explores the unknown, the monstrous, and of course certain boundaries about human vulnerability. And that's why we have these areas that are set up on our screen here, the Victorian era, the mythos and folklore. Victorian era is like well known about this in this range. You have a lot of stories from the Victorian era, like a lot of photos, weird stuff going on. When it comes to mythos, mythos is actually the area where there's like the blurry line of mythos is between like culture and religion. It actually builds the mythos, and folklore is usually our stories that are kind of grabbed over time in certain ways from like verbal communication usually, and those type of things are kind of like following through together. So we'll focus on how horror sets the stage by exploring the origins of it as a genre. We'll delve into why horror taps in our primal fears and how it evolved into powerful genre we know today. And we'll focus on what makes horror such a compelling tool for storytelling and design, introducing the universal elements that continue to inspire concept artists and designers across media. Let's go into horror themes in pop culture. So, as we know, there's a lot of horror themes in pop culture, and horror isn't limited just to one medium, just so we understand. Its themes are pervasive across pop culture, from films and games to literature, music, and even fashion. The chapter explores how iconic horror tropes like the monsters, the supernatural, psychological terror have become part of mainstream culture. For artists, this chapter will provide insight into how these themes are visually represented and adapted in different mediums, and how they influence character design, mood setting, and of course world building. And we have to understand that there's a lot of games and products out there. We're going to explore a couple of IPs as well. And since we are in this pop culture area of like understanding horror, we have a couple of areas that we need to consider usually if we're actually tackling this theme. So we have visual dissonance, color and lighting, psychological distortion, uncanny valley, and symbolism. So these are kind of the main things that are kind of going or revolving around this theme or genre of horror. And let's go through each and one of them and see what they actually do to help us understand this area. Horror often uses unsettling visuals, unexpected shapes, twisted forms, or eerie symmetry. For artists, playing with proportion and breaking visual norms can evoke discomfort and fear in designs. And we see this in a lot of products out there. Some of these products that we have like this, sort of like we have fantasy horror, for example, which is attached to products such as Dark Souls. And Those type of things are going into, it's combining fantasy with horror as well, and we have a lot of twisted forms and distorted things. We have different types of games such as Outlast, but we'll go into that a bit more later. When it comes to color and lighting, right, we have muted, desaturated tones with sudden pops of red or stark contrast in lighting that create tension. So there's some type of tension created through lighting. Shadows and low lighting are essential tools to hide or reveal details, heightening suspense. So the suspense component is actually really important, and we have to understand it. And everything that goes around the idea of like shadows and low lighting actually is pervasive to develop a horror type of setting. When it comes to psychological distortion, characters or environment that subtly distort reality, like warped reflections or twisted perspectives, can tap into deeper fears. Artists can use this to create a sense of unease and unreliability in their designs. And of course, that goes into the psychological distortion part, where things are playing with you in that manner. The area of uncanny valley, so designing creatures or characters that are almost human but slightly off, can trigger discomfort. Small tweaks like lifeless eyes and unnatural movement can make something familiar feel terrifying. That is simply because we are wired to actually watch all these things, right? So the way we perceive things, we have this type of thing where, just to give you a simple example, if we hear a sound that someone says, we cannot necessarily make up exactly what is said. But if we see the mouth movement, we'll actually notice that it's actually this word that is being said, and so on and so forth. So as long as there's like a parity between what we see and what we hear, usually the visuals override the hearing, right? So you hear something weird, let's say, but if you don't see something weird, that is maybe like, it's just a sound. But if it's kind of enforced by visuals, usually it's like that becomes terrifying, and that is the area of uncanny valley. And of course, the last part is symbolism. Horror often uses symbols to represent deeper fears, right? So like skulls for death or clocks for inevitable fate. Integrating these subtle symbols into your work can add layers of meaning and tension. And we have some visual representation at the bottom as well. So when it comes to like visual dissonance, again, I try to grab the best possible reference I could. We have lighting and color, and psychological distortion, uncanny valley, and of course symbolism. Let's go into horror themes in video games and films. So when it comes to video games and films, there are a lot of products out there that are kind of going on these themes, and a lot of different types of tropes. And here we'll examine certain types of similarities, differences between the horror in video games and films, with special focus on the psychological effects of jump scares and the power of mystery. And we'll try to break down games like Outlast, Dead Space, and Amnesia, and we're going to talk a bit about them. And of course, a certain type of usage of the interactive mechanics to heighten tensions, and certain type of films like It Follows or Enter a Quiet Place that is used in cinematography, and of course uses sound and different types of things to evoke fear. And these chapters explore how to design tension and mystery visual, from environment design to character design, and of course like how these elements are kind of creating truly terrifying experience in both mediums. And of course you'll see that a game like Outlast is quite a terrifying experience as a whole. It's a first-person survival horror game that is set in a abandoned asylum. And here I'm speaking about Outlast 1, because there's Outlast 2 as well, and I believe we have some references here from Outlast 2. But it's mainly like we're talking about the first one, and you play as a journalist armed only with a camera recorder, relying on night vision to navigate dark corridors, of course, trying to evade terrifying enemies. The lack of weapons adds a layer of vulnerability, amplifying the actual fear. So we have to understand that in Outlast specifically, we can see based on the reference that it's quite a terrifying experience, as this like type of cam view that is going on. And we see like what happens in the first one. So the first references are kind of like in the Outlast in the first set, and the second references, they're like references from Outlast 2. And we have to understand that this game itself, the narrative is actually written really well, because it's creating all these ups and downs in terms of experience. You got moments of peace and silence, and of course moment of heightened tension, and of course you're being run down by a lot of interesting characters. When it comes to Dead Space is a sci-fi horror game which takes place in this derelict space station. I actually played it, and you have the necromorphs, which are some sort of grotesque alien-human hybrids. It has a very dark atmosphere. It always has this lighting, that comes from the top, creating more terrifying type of scenarios. And of course, the sort of hybrids and the necromorphs actually have like all these shapes inside of them that is distorted. And the intense sound design to create a truly claustrophobic experience kind of like emphasizes the whole scenario that happens in Dead Space. And of course, everything is powered up by the designs themselves, which are quite uncanny in some cases, and that actually makes the entire experience really, really cool from this type of genre. And the last one, we have Amnesia: The Dark Descent, which is renowned for oppressive atmosphere and psychological horror. Amnesia places players in this dark, unsettling castle filled with unspeakable horrors. Players must rely on solving puzzles and avoiding monsters, as there are no combat mechanics. So, in this particular experience, when you don't have any combat mechanics, you actually cannot fight, you cannot defend yourself mainly, and that actually adds a very huge layer of like this type of suspense and tension that kind of occurs into these type of themes. Now let's go into some films, okay? So when it comes to like we got It Follows and Hereditary here. It Follows, it's a modern psychological horror about a supernatural entity that relentlessly follows its victims. So this movie is a sort of slow building tension, eerie atmosphere, and unique concepts that create a sort of lingering sense of unease. And you'll notice this like if you will see the movie or if you've seen it, you will have that kind of like building up process, and then and of course it uses sometimes wide empty spaces to heighten the tension. So these type of scenarios, and of course if you check the color palettes, the compositions, the way that things are actually put together, you'll notice that these things actually occur consistently across the movie. And there's some frames in the movie that are absolutely amazing, and they're really well put together from this standpoint. And of course you got Hereditary, which is a supernatural horror film that deals with a family trauma and demonic possession. It is known for its disturbing visuals, deeply unsettling atmosphere, and slow burn approach to terror, climaxing with a shocking twist that leaves audiences haunted. And again, this is another different movie, which is again, it's like built in a different manner than the previous one, than It Follows. And of course, like this has this idea of like sort of like a curse type of thing going on a deeper level with these demonic possessions. And of course, we have a horror, which is called A Quiet Place. And again, this one is not necessarily like the heightened horror type of thing. It's more like goes on the uncanny and eerie. And therefore, it's set in a post-apocalyptic world, which is overrun by blind monsters that are larger than humans and hunt others only based on sound. So the film's core is about silence and tension building, and it follows a family struggling to survive by living in complete silence, as making any sound can become deadly. So whatever happens, you're not allowed to make any sound. So imagine living in a world like that. Even the thought of it is actually uncanny. And of course, the movie itself, we got Emily Blunt, I believe, as one of the main actresses, and the family itself and the struggles that they go through. And of course, there are other people as well that are trying to like gather resources, because this scenario actually has two sides to it. It has the uncanny monsters that are hunting just based on sound, and of course you got other humans that are trying to hide themselves and live in the same manner, and they're taking resources. There's like this world is like a survival mode. You don't only have to survive from a sort of resource standpoint, but you have to survive the monsters as well. Now let's go into horror elements across pop culture and usage. So, horror elements across pop culture and usage. So, in this area, we'll explore how horror aesthetics and elements can be used in visual development for games, films, and other forms of media. From creature design to eerie environments, we'll discuss how artists can incorporate horror elements like unsettling shapes, dissonant color schemes, and disturbing compositions into their work. So, of course, the main thing we have to understand here about mood itself, we have dissonance, disturbance, clear, and eerie. So these are key words for these type of genre. And of course, like maybe this page, you guys can actually save it because it's very useful and it's easy to understand. And when you're looking for references, these are the type of things you have to search for. You can use them as keywords and so on and so forth. And when it comes to general elements that you want to keep in mind, you can think about shadows and silhouette, fog and mist, blood and gore, And of course, like maybe in some cases, blood and gore is overused in some cases, but you have, for example, decaying structures. For example, Chernobyl, like the Shadow of Chernobyl, for example, has these decaying structures going on. You have distorted faces and forms. You have things such as Uncanny Valley. You have Gothic architecture. You got bats, you got ravens, spiders, full moon, dark skies, pumpkins, jack-o'-lanterns, haunted houses, graveyards, creepy dolls, and you have Chucky here, for example, in terms of creepy dolls. It's a very old movie and a known one. You got masks, such as like Jason, for example, uses a mask, and Leatherface uses a mask as well. You got broken mirrors, you have candles and flickering lights, you got skulls and skeletons, ritual symbols, occult markings, abandoned spaces, and so on and so forth. You got rust, old metal. All these keywords that you actually see here can be used in a very good way to actually develop a horror theme, and we're following up on this type of thing here with some reference images that is across the board. And we have like from sort of like culture, we have some cultural elements, we have some like traditional painting elements, we have some sort of like different cultural components, we have some sculptures as well, we have some doll faces, broken mirrors, spiders, Leatherface there, we have a character there as well. So we have all these references here that are all strange, eerie, and actually goes into this theme of horror. Now let's go into the importance of storytelling and fear. Here we're going to start about what Jung said. Jung used this theory of the collective unconscious to explain how fears and social phobias can manifest in children and adults for no apparent reason. Fear of the dark, loud sound, bridges, or blood may all be rooted in this collective unconscious due to an inherited genetic trait. So the idea of the inherited genetic trait there, it's actually really important, because like regardless for where you come from, what walk of life, especially like when you're young, when you're a kid, and imagination is actually really strong, and there's the concept of pareidolia, where we see stuff and things that we are trying to make up things or compensate, so our brain tries to compensate for things we do not see. Therefore, you will have some sort of things that you see in the dark. You try to look for faces, for example, because the first thing that pops into mind is faces, because that's actually the danger. So you're looking for faces because that's more dangerous than actually, like a bunny, right? You're not looking for bunnies in the dark because, rabbits or bunnies are not dangerous. For visual developers and storytellers, this chapter will show how to blend the psychological aspects of horror into your designs and narratives. And here we have certain areas that you want to probably think about whenever you're actually doing these type of tropes or actually working with them. You got engaging the audience, which fear grabs attention and keeps the audience emotionally invested. Scary moments create suspense, driving engagement and making the story stakes feel real. Now, this is actually important because oftentimes, if you're actually playing a jump scare type of game and you're actually jump scared, that actually feels almost real, because like you're immersed into that scenario and you're actually taking things almost at face value. So immersion through atmosphere. So horror uses mood and setting to pull audience into the world. Elements like lighting, sound, and pacing makes the environment feel unsettling, heightening immersion. You are driving the character development. So fear reveals true character traits. Scary situations force decisions under pressure, adding depth and relatability to characters by exposing vulnerabilities or strengths. And this happens in Outlast quite a lot, and you can actually see there that's probably the best example where you do have to make decisions under pressure, otherwise you're actually gonna die. It explores deeper themes. Horror often reflects deeper fears or societal issues. It can be a metaphor for trauma, isolation, or cultural anxieties, making stories more meaningful and impactful. And this is across the board on different cultures. There are horror stories across like different areas, regions, different places. And that is important because it actually either like keeps us safe. So I do believe there is a message through like horror storytelling, that people should not play with things they don't understand, not go into places that they shouldn't go, and so on and so forth, right? And of course, there's like this area of creating memorable narratives, where scary moments leave a lasting impression, making the stories memorable. And it's because we're wired to stay away from bad things. And fear evokes strong emotions that resonate long after the experience, ensuring the story sticks with the audience. The idea of the story sticking with the audience is not only to showcase the idea of horror itself, but I believe it's actually deeper than that. It's actually to keep us away from bad things. Now let's go to some final thoughts on horror. Horror themes are extremely important to not only understand the boundaries of our psyche, but also get to a collective understanding of deeper roots of human consciousness. Culturally, it reflects our collective anxieties and societal issues, and it puts a lot of other things on pause in making us think for a minute. This is important because I truly believe that every time you listen to a horror story or someone tells you like a sort of eerie scenario that they actually encountered, it is strange how we actually tend to go to a deeper level to understand that or the meaning of that story and connect with it at a level that is some sort of like, as Jung puts it, in the collective unconscious. And actually, I think there is something to it there. Artistically speaking, horror pushes creative boundaries and it allows us to explore the unsettling matters of reality, some through thought-provoking fears that humans inherently have or even develop. For artists in games and films industry, horror is a powerful tool to engage, provoke, and tell stories that remain with us even after the screen turns dim. Notable artists here, again, this is a list that I made with artists that I believe they're actually working on this theme extremely well. All these are amazing artists. We got Maxim Berehin, Zirui Wang, or Insist, Oleg Bovenko, Piotr Jablonski, and Dan Peacock. So if you actually check all these artists here, you'll actually find a PDF. You'll be able to download the PDF and actually check the artist here as well. I do believe all of them actually tackle this in a very different way, but they all actually build images that are extremely well done, extremely engaging, and sometimes like strange, eerie, and actually hits that spot of really amazing horror scenarios or eerie or anything that goes into this realm of darkness. Since we're actually at the end, I do recommend you guys to actually go and check out our courses. You have Light and Color, for example, from Axel. You got a Character Design and Skeleton 101 from Matthias, and of course Visual Theory, Perception, and Creativity, which I go deeper into the sort of like creative process of the mind and what that actually occurs there. I hope you guys actually check it out. They're really cool and well built. Everything that you see us building is based on research and development, so we don't mess around with like just putting our bias there. We're trying to do research, we're trying to develop, and actually give you guys a very consistent understanding. That being said, I want to thank you, and I hope you actually enjoyed this session. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated. Check our video description for more resources, including courses, tips, feedback, and a lively community on Discord. I'll see you there.